Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us once again for the conversation. My name is Shaligan Peterson, and today we will be discussing businesses and political party funding. In the studio with me, I have the chairperson of the Electoral Commission of Namibia, that is Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us once again for the conversation. My name is Shaligan Peterson, and today we will be discussing businesses and political party funding. In the studio with me, I have the chairperson of the Electoral Commission of Namibia, that is Nothemba Chipoya. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Shelley.
Yes. The conversation around businesses and political parties have really blown up over the last few years. A lot of questions. If we look at the culture in different places, the US specifically, we see a trend. It is quite sort of normalized. Let's just come back home and look at the legal framework. What does the legal framework say about political party funding?
Well, the Electoral Act basically provides in Section 140 that political parties are required to account for their public funds. They need to report to the Electoral Commission and submit audited financial statements on an annual basis. And of course, in terms of Section 158, they also need to disclose what they have done with the public funding that they receive from the National Assembly. Those are now the parties that are in Parliament. Section 140 is applicable to all parties, whether they are in Parliament or not. But Section 158 is only applicable to those parties that are in Parliament and receive public funding from the Treasury through the National Assembly.
Yeah. If they do not abide to these sections of the Act, what could they possibly face?
Well, there are penalties in terms of Section 188. There are penalties, there are fines, and of course the most onerous penalty is that you can be deregistered.
Yeah.
That is the most onerous threshold of foreign funding and local Namibian funding to get their agreement and to get their input on what they regarded would be a sufficient threshold. So with their consent, we ended up gazetting a threshold in our regulations for foreign funding of 2 million. If your party or representative or candidate receives above 2 million, they would then have to disclose to the Electoral Commission any funding received above 2 million. And any local funding above the threshold of 4 million would then have to be disclosed to the Electoral Commission of Namibia.
Yeah. Okay, this is very specific when it comes to political parties and businesses. What has the ECN noticed in terms of what they've seen in other countries, the US for instance, and Namibia when it comes to political party funding and the association with certain businesses?
Well, I think that really in Namibia, I think one of the concerns with our political parties was that they would not always want to be openly associated with businesses or necessarily they felt in discussions that they may be victimized or so on if certain businesses are associated with them or those businesses could be victimized. And that is why you see the threshold being higher for local funding rather than international funding. Of course, I think with US, if you compare with international aspects, the US has got a different culture to us, democratic culture, because in the US you would often clearly when you go to vote to register, you indicate whether you're a Democrat or you are a Republican. Whereas in Namibia, you would never disclose your party affiliation when you register to vote. So I think that aspect of the secrecy of the vote is treated in a totally different manner in Namibia and in the US. It's totally different. I think Namibians in Namibia, we really basically hold on to the secrecy of the vote, and we really protect the secrecy of the vote. So it's a different approach, really.
Yeah. When we look at Section 141, I remember in your 2018-2019, that was your annual report that you released. You put out a table of political parties and how they've submitted their financial statements over the years. And there's a major issue with consistency.
Yes.
Have you seen all political parties in the last 2 years, 2 financial years, give their financial statements, or is that still something that that is lagging behind on their side?
No, this is something I think we have to say on both sides, on the side of ECN and political parties, that really they are not always fully submitting. I think that is very clear. They're not always complying or submitting their financial reports. And I have to say that even as at ECN, you know, our mandate is really to supervise and control elections. So our capacity we don't really have that capacity for monitoring political parties with regard to party funding. So I think that in that sense, we would say that it is the parties and also ECN that have not fully really followed up on the issue of political party funding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that not then fall onto accountability? You're speaking about capacity. What will it take for the ECN to be very strict and strictly enforce, especially that part when it comes to political party funding, and holding them accountable for it?
Yes, I think we also see it as being more not necessarily holding the big stick, and if you don't, this is what will happen, and then enforcing that, because the most onerous offense penalty is that you can be deregistered. But I believe that what is important is to educate the political parties and for them to understand their responsibility, their public responsibility. They're being given public funds when it comes to those who are in parliament, and they need to account for those public funds. So I think it's more a question of educating the political parties and getting parties to understand the accountability aspect that they have with regard to accounting to the Electoral Commission. But on the other hand, I think it is also important to say that ECN may not be the best placed organization to be monitoring political parties. And basically, we at ECN, when we had the law reform process earlier on before the Act was promulgated, we went through a law reform process, and we actually recommended that that function should not lie within the Electoral Commission of Namibia, but it would be better placed at the Auditor General's office. So I think that is something that we are still looking at as Electoral Commission. We are reviewing the law now again, and we are really still of the view that the Auditor General's office is better placed to ensure that public funds are properly accounted for.
No. Have you received any sort of response from that side, the Auditor General side, to willingness to take on this function, as you've suggested?
Well, I think at this stage we have not really had any discussions as such on this specific issue. But obviously when we do have our stakeholder workshop on the electoral law review, this is something that will come up and stakeholders will be able to give their views. Of course, in different countries, it is Auditor General. In other jurisdictions, it is the Electoral Commission. But we are of the view that it would be preferable if this is a function that is handed over to the Auditor General's office.
Yeah. Now, during this process, while that process is still ongoing and you're reviewing and you do have your stakeholder engagement, will it still be that ECN will just educate and create awareness with political parties until that process is finalized?
Yes, definitely that will remain our responsibility, to continue to educate the political parties and to continue to try and ensure that they do comply. But I think, let me say that if you look, not that this is an excuse, but I think there are a number of studies that have been done in Africa, in Asia, and all over. And this is one area of democracy that is very, very difficult. The implementation, the laws are there, they're on the statute books, but the actual implementation thereof is really, it is a problem. It is a problem not only in Namibia, it is a problem on the African continent. Studies have shown that the implementation part thereof is lacking. And even in big democracies like the US and Europe, it is an area which is very, very difficult to monitor and to enforce.
Yeah, well, one would believe it's on paper it's quite easy to say, as per usual. When we get into the implementation, when you say it's difficult, what exactly is that one or two things that makes it a bit harder than is stipulated on paper?
Well, I think maybe, I don't want to say, but maybe political associations, they may not be that organized, you know, to the extent that they have books, they have auditors, they audit their financial statements. So I think this may be a new concept that is there in Namibia. I don't know whether all political parties, as a rule, as a general rule, as a practice, this is what they're used to doing. So I think it's also a cultural thing that they also need to be educated for them to understand that if you're an organized association, you need to organize your financial aspects, and especially if you're making use of public funds, they need to be accounted for properly.
Yeah.
And the transparency has to be there, and the public, the electorate, have a right to know how public funds are being used. And of course, for anyone who wants to vote for a specific party, they may also have an interest as to how that party is disbursing their funds. And so that is why the law provides for parties in Parliament and for parties outside of Parliament to account for their funds.
Yeah. How important are these things, such as political party funding, to a democracy? You know, we already know how important voting is to a democracy, and having political parties basically in the DNA of any democracy. But the funding part, how important is it? The Constitution does allow people and organizations to freely and openly donate or, you know, give to a political party. But is it critical to a democracy?
Yes, I believe it is very critical, because credibility is very important and transparency is very important. If you want to grow a democratic culture which is fighting against corruption, which is really standing for a corrupt-free society, your political parties that aspire to be leaders, that aspire to be parliamentarians, then surely they should follow that ethical trend. And it should start with their own organizations to ensure that their own organizations are corrupt-free, that they account openly, rather to educate them as to their responsibility and why it is important for them to be accountable to the public.
Yeah. When we had the regional and constituency, or yeah, let's just go the regional elections, did we have the same issue? Were they enforced, or did they declare any of these?
No, but I must say that this does not become so much of an issue with regional and local authority elections. It's not such a big issue, but of course they are required annually to disclose.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to come back to one question. I think I didn't perhaps get your answer there. When it came to the annual reports and financial statements of the political parties, let's say last year, the last financial year, that was 2019, 2020, did you get any financial statements?
No, we received for 2019, we received for 2018. 2020, we did not receive. What we only received was the disclosure from one party last year for 2019.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you look at that party's history, have they been consistent in giving their financial statements before?
Well, let me put it this way, that it's only 1 year really where we have received from the majority of parties.
Yeah.
So that consistency has not yet been built up.
No. Do you think it will be built up in the next few years?
I think it's possible with proper education and cooperation with the parties. It can be built up.
Yeah.
Yes, it can be built up.
If you look at your counterparts, the Electoral Authority in South Africa and Botswana, have you had discussions about political party funding, and has it been an issue for them as well, for the political parties to disclose that?
Well, with South Africa, they only amended their law last year. So it was only applicable, I think they set up their office last year in June. That is when they started setting up their office for political party funding. So I think by now they would not have had to receive anything yet, probably this year for last year, but they only set up their office last year in June.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Botswana, but South Africa only set up their office last year, and their law was only amended recently.
Do theirs run exactly the same as us, or are there a few differences?
There are some few differences. I think one important issue is that they've come up with an investment fund where parties can also receive funding from this specific fund, which is, I think, different from ours. But basically, they do account for what they receive from Parliament and so on, and they also have to submit audited statements.
Yes. Do they also, the function of accountability that you have suggested the AG take over here in Namibia, is it the same with them, or does the electoral body have that power?
It's within the Electoral Commission of Namibia. I mean, of South Africa,
yeah.
IEC, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay, let's look at the international trend. Once again, let's go a bit broader than what we know here. Do you see the same sort of tradition of sort of harboring the secrecy of the vote in the international world, or is it different?
As I said, in countries like America, there's really no secrecy. People are very open who they support, even when they register to vote. They indicate they're a Democrat, they're a Republican. I think in Africa it's slightly different. It is quite different. People don't openly. I think the secrecy of the vote is very much protected in the African democratic culture.
Yeah.
It's very much protected.
But why is it the difference? Why is it that here it is harbored almost like it's the greatest secret? But in other countries, they freely give. I'm not sure about Europe. Perhaps you can also go into the European traditions there.
Well, I think in international best practice, that is one of the important tenets of democracy. The secrecy of the vote is one of the important tenets that need to be upheld. So I think actually in Africa, when it comes to electoral processes, we are actually very much ahead. I think when it comes to implementing electoral processes, we are very much ahead, and we're very much different from Europe. In America and in UK, you can go and vote sometimes without even showing identification. You just give your name. So it's a very different culture.
Process.
Yeah, it's a very different process to ours.
Yes, last year we had the heated debate. I remember the head of the affirmative repositioning was speaking about, why do you need a voter's card? That conversation was very much heated here. They used the examples you used without having to go without a voter's card. You can use your ID, or you can just say your name. What is the importance of the card? Why is it so different, and why is it so fundamental for Namibia and for our electoral processes to have that card?
Well, the card is important for identification, and that's why we also put biometrics into the card. But I think we are evolving as a country. And in the future, it is possible that we could vote only with an ID. If our systems are converged with the Ministry of Home Affairs, And if every Namibian has an ID card, there would be no reason why we could not move to that, why the Electoral Commission could not evolve to voting with an ID card. Because the important aspect is to show, to prove citizenship, that you are a citizen. So if you have an ID card proving that you are a Namibian citizen, then we could probably in the future evolve to voting with an ID card. So that is possible.
That is a possibility. I think that is what the heated debate was about, just the possibility of it being. Okay, we've done the electoral processes, we've dealt with the card. I mean, this question of the ECN and its sort of credibility, something you touched on, but it's still being questioned. Why do you think it's still being questioned when you have proven after every election free and fair? You can show receipts of how free and fair it was when we compare it to other African
Commission of Yes, it is.
Yeah. The perceptions around it, despite the IPPR are very sort of they're well at criticizing, but also pointing out what has been done right. The IPPR has constantly put out this information, but this perception doesn't change. I mean, the voters still sort of, some of the voters, not all of them, let's not generalize, have said that felt like the elections are being rigged because the ruling party is, back to back with the results, they come out on top. Despite that, is there anything that the ECN feels it could do to change that perception?
Yeah, I think it's a question of education. People need to educate themselves, because if they do proper analysis, they would really understand that there is no rigging, honestly speaking. If you look at the results of previous elections and you do proper analysis, I think they would come out with a totally different picture. So I think it's a question of educating yourself and finding out what does the ECN really do, how do the processes really function. It's a lack of understanding of how the processes also function. Because if you really understand how the processes function, then I think you would have a totally different view. So it's a lack of understanding.
Yes. Let's just go back to businesses and political parties. I want to just, I know the ECN as a body doesn't really deal with, the perceptions of businesses. But why do some businesses sort of align themselves with political parties? As a person that has dealt with elections and dealt with this democratic processes, why do you think they align themselves with certain political parties?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's very difficult to give an answer to that unless you do proper study and research. But businesses, there's freedom of association. The Constitution allows for freedom of association. So every business or every individual or every organization or association has freedom to associate. And I think that is something that we have upheld in this country. So every business is free to associate with whatever political party or candidate they feel would represent them properly.
Yeah. Yes, the freedom of association is there, but we also have the loopholes there. In terms of freedom of association, but that has also led to the perception of businesses being captured because of the association. How do we deter from that?
Well, that's where you need to have a very strong system in place that is going to monitor and implement the issues of political party funding, because that is one of the aspects where there is concern, obviously, that certain institutions or business organizations can capture, a political party. They can have undue influence over policy making in a country, in a government, and so forth. And that is where it is important to have a very strong arm when it comes to political party funding. But I must say that in Namibia, it may not, so far, Well, in the previous years, it has not been that big an issue. It's not a lot of money that you see parties having. But obviously, it is a growing concern. I think in the last year or two, of course, it has become a growing concern. And that is why I think it is important to ensure that you have an institution which has that as its core mandate. Because for us as the Electoral Commission, we have been built up as an institution whose core mandate is to deliver credible elections. So we are not really the best placed organization, but it is important to have an organization that is strong, that is able to audit and to be able to implement and so forth.
Yeah.
In countries like India, they've got very strong powers, the electoral management body. They even have police powers and so forth, but I don't think that is what is needed in Namibia.
Okay, I just wanted
So
to ask.
it's a totally different situation. And I mean, money there in politics is a very huge thing. It's a very, very big thing.
Do you see us moving in that direction anytime soon, or do you think we have the strong enough element not to go in that direction?
Well, the danger will always be there that money can become a big influence in politics, and it's better that we have strong institutions that have the capability to deal with that, to ensure that we don't have a situation where we have businesses strongly influence government.
Yeah. There's something you mentioned where you said that political party funding, political parties don't have the large amounts that you would see in other countries getting in. Do we see, from what you've noticed, do you see large amounts being pumped into political parties or not?
Well, I think what we have seen being disclosed,
Yeah.
it's not large, huge amounts when you compare to other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really comparable from the few accounts that we have received. It's not a lot of money, but obviously, it's not to say that in the future we cannot go that way.
Yeah.
Obviously, we could be heading in that direction.
Could that be a sign that our businesses and our political parties are independent in terms of undue influence, when we don't see the large amounts being channeled there?
Well, of course, I mean, we're talking about what is being disclosed.
Yeah.
So necessarily there could be monies that are not being disclosed. And that is why I'm saying that you need proper established organization to deal with that. Like in other countries, it's the Auditor General or it's the Registrar of Political Parties, and they have proper units with investigative people with investigative capabilities who are able to investigate political parties and find out whether there is funding which is being disclosed or not.
Yeah. So can the ECN then say, if you suspect a political party getting any large amounts of money, that you can say, can you ask questions in relation to that? Do you sort of the investigative power?
No, we don't have those powers, and that is why I'm saying that we need to give these powers to another organization, not necessarily the Electoral Commission.
So the Act lacks there. Would you say that the Act lacks sort of that investigative power?
Yeah, it does, but I think again it would not be it would not be within the purview or the mandate of the ECN.
Yeah.
It would be outside our purview.
This sort of ties in with political party sustainability, if we have to go into that. Political parties have businesses that they run, and would you say we see a sort of money being channeled from those businesses making money into political parties? Would that then still be considered as a donation?
Yes, it can be.
Yeah.
It could be. Yeah.
Even if it is their own businesses that they are running.
They are allowed to run businesses.
Yes. I'm talking specifically about, let's say I have a business, I'm a political party, I'm political party red. and I have a business called Red Pty. If Red Pty gives money, let's say 5 million to the political party Red, would that be considered a donation?
Well, we don't know how it depends on the business how they
Yeah.
are declaring it.
Yeah.
But it most likely would be a donation. Yes.
Yes. If the political parties do say, okay, we have gotten 5 million from company B, and that company is sort of suspected of any irregular and illegal activities, can the ECN do anything with that information if they do suspect?
Well, I think no. It's only maybe something could be handed over to the enforcement authorities, who are the police, prosecutor general, and so forth. But as an organization, no, there would be nothing that ECN could do. Those powers are not there in the Act.
And the information of disclosing, is that open to the public? If you get someone disclosing information to you, they got over 5 million from this company, the public can come and ask you, did they get it?
Yes. It's open to the public.
Yeah.
There's just a certain amount that needs to be paid, and that information is accessible to the public. And of course, the public audited accounts, the parties are also supposed to publish them in the newspapers.
Yeah. But if you see them, they don't publish it in the newspaper, but they disclose to you, what is your role then there?
No, the disclosures, they don't have to publish in the newspapers. The audited accounts is what needs to be published in the newspapers.
Okay. But they can definitely get the information from the ECN. Yes. This conversation on political parties, and we are just about to close up and end the conversation. But what is your thoughts on what you're seeing in the country? Political parties are struggling to disclose this information. What are your thoughts to those or on this matter? Going forward, how will the ECN handle it? You mentioned more education sessions. What else can you do?
I think it's really it's more education. It's more education of the parties that needs to be given to ensure that they really comply. And then, of course, from our side as ECN, to enforce it, to implement it, until such time that this function is given to another body.
Yeah. How long do you think that process will take?
Well, it's difficult to say. We are proposing amendments to our law, and that can take a year or so. So it could take a bit of time.
Yeah. For the next year, it would be education for political parties. Thank you very much for joining us. The conversation continues. It does not end here. Please do go to our social media pages. Please put some comments, ask more questions if you like, and we will try to get the chairperson to answer it for you. For me, Shaligan, it has been a pleasure, and have a good evening.